Why do we associate a light skin phenotype with something that is more desirable and easy to digest? Some of the most important and lasting cultural artifacts that still stick with me to this day are memes that originated from 2010's Tumblr. This one is no exception. This meme illustrates the impacts of colorism and racism on the public images and visual aesthetics associated with different countries around the world. Here is what the meme depicts. Panel 1, left side, the public face of India, featuring a light-skinned woman with keen features. Panel 1, right, the private face of India, featuring a darker-skinned woman with more tribal features. Panel 2, left, the public face of Brazil, featuring a lighter-skinned woman with straight hair. Panel 2, right, the hidden face of Brazil, featuring a visibly black woman wearing a head wrap. And panel 3, left, the public face of the Philippines, featuring a tan-skinned woman with straight black hair. Panel 3, right, the hidden face of the Philippines, featuring a darker-skinned woman with curly, textured hair. So I first came across this meme probably a decade ago on Tumblr, but it was the first thing that came to mind when I was coming up with the topic for this video. One of my favorite video topics, or beats if you want to call it that, is critical music journalism. That is to say, analyzing music from a cultural studies perspective rather than just evaluating the sound textures of the music itself. Post-colonial poptimism, if you will. Now, I love pop music, including all of the artists that I will go on to mention in this video, but I think it's really important to recognize and acknowledge that the music industry does not weigh every artist equally, specifically when we are talking about artists and their marketability and even their perceived relatability. Now, in this moment in 2025, there is a lot of music being released, but not necessarily one singular artist that's dominating the music market. So this might be a good time to pull back and reflect a little bit on some of these other trends going on in the music industry. I think it's time to take stock of some of these critical conversations. In this video, I want to explore the topic of what it means to be a global pop star. And my thesis is that global pop stardom does continue to have a more white face, although it's a little bit more complicated than reducing the category of white to just meaning European or even Eurocentric. I think that in order to evaluate any given pop star's career, we have to evaluate both their body of work in addition to their visual aesthetic, their visual identity, including perhaps how their visual identity aids them in their pop stardom and their musical success overall. To illustrate this, in the scope of this video, I want to evaluate the careers of 3 global pop stars relevant today in 2025. English-Albanian singer Dua Lipa, Spanish singer Rosalia, and Brazilian singer Anita. Again, this video is born out of a deep appreciation for the bodies of work of all 3 artists, but I do want to enter them into this larger conversation still. This analysis is hopefully not rooted in Stan Wars, but instead rooted in the fields of cultural studies and sociology. That said, here are some disclaimers. Number 1. If I mention 2 artists in the same breath or juxtapose them, it's not exactly to compare their careers or their success per se, but to enter them into a conversation with each other. And in fact, to draw comparisons to how they're received on the global stage. 2. None of this analysis is meant to defame or discredit the work of any of these artists. I do realize that I picked 3 women artists when I'm talking about global pop stars, so I don't want to engender any misogyny or patriarchal thoughts when it comes to looking at the careers of these artists by virtue of them being women. And 3, while your definition of a global pop star may differ from mine, I still hope that you find my analysis valuable. As I go through each artist, I will be naming each artist and also giving them a particular tag, a tag which I think encapsulates their positionality in this conversation. As we go through this video, please let me know your thoughts on my thoughts, and let's try to keep the comment section positive and constructive, please. Now, to first unpack this notion of a white face, I think we need to look at one particular artist whose whiteness has a sort of nondescript quality to it. As in, we know it's there, but we don't really have an association of it to a particular point of origin. That first artist being Dua Lipa, who I'm going to give the tag of effortless. As we go through, let me know if you think the tag makes sense for each artist. So my first exposure to Dua Lipa was back in 2017 when her single New Rules was released and became kind of a cultural moment. Notably, New Rules was not the lead single from her self-titled debut album. It actually came out as a single after the album had already dropped. And even at that point when New Rules came out, I knew that I was a little bit behind on Dua Lipa mania. And in fact, Dua Lipa had already been charting a course for success, having signed to Warner Brothers Records in 2014, 3 years before New Rules came out. Now, New Rules is great, and Dua Lipa's first album is actually my favorite out of her albums that she's released thus far. I do want to spotlight, though, that even early in her career, around the time of her first album and the rollout process, she was doing some other records that I feel like were a testament to her crossover appeal. She was in different areas, and I think we don't talk about that enough. 3 songs I want to mention in this analysis are No Lie, Sean Paul featuring Dua Lipa. Sean Paul being a very famous Jamaican dancehall artist, the record is a little bit of a dancehall record with a trop pop and EDM kind of drop. My Love by Wale featuring Dua Lipa, Wizkid, and Major Lazer. This one is a little bit of a watered down Afrobeats track because of the involvement of Major Lazer, but yet it's still in the Afrobeats market overall. And one of my personal favorite Dua Lipa records, Kiss and Make Up, Dua Lipa featuring Blackpink. Blackpink, of course, is a very famous K-pop group, so I think Dua Lipa was really smart in getting into that K-pop pocket at this time. So my theory is that Dua Lipa was always destined for this sort of global stardom and was eager to prove her crossover appeal in different music markets. Returning to New Rules though, its unusual sound and structure still really strikes me even now almost 10 years after its release. So New Rules is credited as being produced by American producer Ian Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick cites producers such as Aphex Twin, Squarepusher, and Outecker as some of his influences. Now this makes sense given some of the very heavy electronic elements that are present on the record. But to me, and let me know if you hear this too, I kind of hear New Rules as almost like an Afrobeats record, or at least the beginnings of an Afrobeats instrumental that has just this EDM drop. And while that combo sounds god-awful in theory, Dua Lipa really pulls it together. I mean, only an artist like Dua Lipa, only Dua Lipa specifically, could really make an instrumental like that work and have the finished product be cohesive. Only Dua could pull it off and tie it together. So obviously Dua reached runaway success with her second era Future Nostalgia, but before we get there, I do want to go over some more of Dua's background. Dua Lipa is of Kosovar Albanian descent and grew up between London and Kosovo. Now, Dua Lipa having grown up partially in London makes a lot of sense. I can definitely see her being influenced by the multicultural sounds of London in the 2000s. And Dua, if you're listening, we need that UK Garage album immediately. Please, I'm begging you. However, Dua herself seems to cite a lot of American music as part of her influences. Pink, Christina Aguilera, Destiny's Child, Gwen Stefani, Outkast, and Madonna being some of her influences. In any case, she appears to have found her lane within pop music, and you don't really see people comparing her to other artists, at least not in my sphere of the internet. The lane that she's created is rather incomparable and unparalleled. So when we arrive at Future Nostalgia, we can credit its success to a couple factors: strong writing, thematic production, and also a perfect time for a new disco sound revival. Future Nostalgia itself is a very glossy product that obviously made a ton of money and sustained nearly a 3-year-long career era for Dua. And Dua herself is kind of this perfect totem to carry this vision forward. What do I mean by that? Yes, Dua Lipa is talented. Yes, Dua Lipa is smart and savvy. And yet, I think we need to attribute at least part of her success to her visual aesthetic, which I see as a meeting point between cosmopolitan London and a Southern European mystique. That is to say, we don't really see her as strictly English or Albanian either way. And that fluidity, I think, has aided her in her career. We know her ethnic origins, and she is very proud of her heritage, but we don't really see her as beholden to that. We don't pigeonhole her to that origin point. We don't see Dua Lipa only making songs like Stereo Love or Mr. Saxo Beat. Her body of work speaks for itself. For me, Dua Lipa's visual aesthetic goes hand in hand with her sort of effortless, cool girl brand. Even if we don't think of her as this static caricature of like a glamorous white woman, we see how much she's on vacation. We know what kind of lifestyle she lives, or appears to live. And that sort of transnational European appearance succeeds because it doesn't carry any sort of cultural baggage. In the eyes of the global receiving public, there's nothing about her that really ties her to one place in a negative way. And to illustrate what I mean about cultural baggage, I want to turn your attention to one particular example out of France, the case study of one Aya Nakamura. Now, Aya Nakamura is very well known within France, and a lot of people think that she is the most successful French pop star of this day and age. It just so happens that Aya Nakamura is of Malian origin. As a visibly African woman, Aya Nakamura has ran into a couple roadblocks throughout her career. And this came to a head in early 2024 in advance of the 2024 Paris Olympics. It was speculated that Aya Nakamura was going to be performing at the opening ceremony of the 2024 Paris Olympics, and a lot of French people took issue with that. There may be several arguments that the French had to say about it, but in my mind, this was because Aya Nakamura was a visibly black woman, and they did not want Aya Nakamura as a visibly black woman to represent France on the global stage. And while Nakamura did end up performing at the 2024 Olympics that summer, it begs the question of who would they have wanted instead? I mean, I guess Yellow wasn't doing anything that summer, but anyway. My conclusion when it comes to Dua is that she possesses this sort of deterritorialized whiteness that aids in her ability to be ubiquitous. It's almost as if we don't have to put any effort into understanding her, and by virtue of that, she doesn't expect any effort from us. She is also not given the task of representing any particular ethnic or racial group. By virtue of her visual aesthetic, we can just kind of metabolize her as is. So for Dua Lipa, navigating the global stage has seemed rather effortless in the same way that whiteness offers a sort of ease of access, much like a passport does. The way she's able to move in between these spaces is rather unconscious. But what happens when that navigation is done somewhat more consciously, perhaps where the wheels are greased by social forces? For that, let's look into Spanish singer Rosalia, whose tag that I will give her is unexpected. So Rosalia is from Spain, and Spain is where she launched her career with songs like 2018's Malamente. Malamente being kind of a pop interpretation of Spanish flamenco music. I remember hearing Rosalia at this time and being quite entranced by the music that she was offering. I saw her in the same vein as maybe a mid-career Nelly Furtado or even an Ibeyi. So Rosalia's 2018 album El Mal Querer received critical acclaim and also catapulted her to the international stage. However, immediately after this album, she started to veer into the direction of the Latin American music market. Her next few products explored different Latin American and diasporic music genres. For example, 2019's Con Altura with J Balvin, which was a massive record. 2020's Que Lo Que, produced by Venezuelan producer Arca, which is kind of a deconstructed reggaeton record. And 2021's La Fama featuring The Weeknd, which takes on bachata. Now, I remember the time at which the record Que Lo Que was released, and I felt some type of way about it. For those who don't know, the slang term Que Lo Que originates in the Spanish spoken in the Dominican Republic. Neither Rosalia, who is from Spain, or producer Arca, who is Venezuelan, really can claim any sort of authenticity to this particular phrase. It seemed at the time that they were really trying to ingratiate themselves into the growing market of reggaeton, dembow, and perreo. And ultimately, in 2022, Rosalia released her heavily reggaeton-inspired album, Motomami. By that point, and continuing into the present day, I would say that Rosalia is one of the most visible reggaeton artists that we've ever seen. As to how to interpret this change in directions, I feel like it's a little tricky. I do believe that Rosalia has a genuine interest in Latin American and diasporic music, and I don't think that she should just be pigeonholed or relegated to making music consistent with her Spaniard identity. But we can't deny that she benefits from a particular privilege related to her Spaniard visual aesthetic, this being a side effect of a social phenomenon called blanqueamiento. Blanqueamiento is really hard to sum up into a convenient blur, but I'm going to try to give an overview of the general history of the term. So, spoiler alert, the Spanish colonized most of Central and South America. In this time, there were three main racial categories, that being the Spaniards, indigenous peoples of the various places they colonized, and also Africans who were descended from enslaved peoples. The word blanqueamiento basically translates to whitening. And when we talk about blanqueamiento, we're talking about a demographic shift away from a majority sort of color populace to a majority white or white presenting populace. And also creating future generations that look lighter and lighter by skin tone. This generally manifests itself now in the perpetuation of a lot of colorism and anti-blackness in Spanish-speaking diasporas. And while I do not know if Rosalia really thought about this when she embarked on her initial musical ventures, the comparison of this seems really clear as day to me. Again, it's not wrong of her as a Spaniard to make reggaeton music, but her presence in the industry is facilitated by her skin tone and her Spaniard identity. This in itself glosses over the many cultural contributions that indigenous and particularly African-descended Spanish-speaking peoples have made to musical culture, by virtue of the fact that Latinidad predicates itself on a historical and current tie to Spain. We cannot deny that the current genres of reggaeton, dembow, and perreo have an African root or origin. So when it comes to Rosalia, on the global stage, she can be this avatar for a Latina and benefit from that proximity to the Afro-diasporic presence in Latin America. Knowing in particular that the Spanish language music industry does not like to promote darker-skinned people as part of its fold. Again, her visual aesthetic is very convenient for marketability. And in fact, her marketability is made a little bit more novel by the fact that she is a Spaniard and not a diasporic Latin American woman. So it begs the question of whether or not Rosalia can sell out by doing reggaeton in comparison to doing a genre even like pop or especially flamenco. Because again, she was critically acclaimed from the jump, but it was only after switching to reggaeton that her fanbase started to grow exponentially. and we just don't have like a visible Afro-Latina in the music industry to compare her to. Could a visibly Afro-Latina artist achieve the same sort of status doing the music that is arguably more native to them than to Rosalia? Beyond that, could an Afro-Latina artist do this sort of experimental take on reggaeton and not be pegged as niche? Again, this is tricky territory to wade into. Arguably the most famous Afro-Latina artist is Celia Cruz. Celia Cruz was born in Cuba but achieved most of her success and fame in the diaspora. And this was also in the 20th century when the state of marketability of Spanish language music looked very different than it does now. Because generally speaking, the most visible women and artists in Latin American music are not visibly Afro-descended. To give a few examples, Shakira, Belinda, Natalia Lafourcade, and Christina Aguilera.
I met Black Christina, so I don't know what she's talking about. So I only know Black Christina.
Meanwhile, acts like Combo Chimbita and Chokip Town, which have Afro-descended lead singers, are far less well known. Which, if you don't listen to Combo Chimbita or Chokip Town now, change that. Now, as to the motivations that Rosalia might have had for changing directions, what's interesting is that in the Spanish press, she actually faced some criticism for being considered not authentic enough to do flamenco-inspired music. This by virtue of her being from Catalonia and for her not having Romani ancestry, which is typically associated with the flamenco genre. So while I do love Rosalia and her music, we can't deny that she can kind of move within and throughout Latin American spaces very easily because she does not have an association with an African root or origin. She can appeal to the generic concept of Latinidad without a cultural baggage of Africanity or indigeneity. That is to say, she benefits from the association of Latinidad without having an African or indigenous root, but ultimately a Spaniard one. Where I want to give Rosalia credit is that there wasn't really a Spanish artist doing reggaeton at the time that she launched her career in the genre. I can't really say that she sold out by doing reggaeton, but she found her lane, and that lane was a no-brainer. So when we think about Rosalia, she can be interpreted in different ways, perhaps as a cultural entrepreneur or perhaps as a cultural interloper. So what could happen in an inverse case, where an artist is representing their culture but makes themselves more ambiguous in order to achieve greater success? Here is where we turn to Anita, and the tag I'm going to give to Anita is optimized. Now, Anita is the stage name of one Larissa de Macedo Machado from Brazil. In Anita's early records in the early 2010s, she was doing the genre of Brazilian funk or funky carioca, and her first major single was called Eu Vou Ficar. Side note, I apologize to any Brazilians watching this for my pronunciation. So the fact that Anita started her career in the genre of funk or funky is really notable. Funky is associated with the city of Rio de Janeiro and particularly the favelas or slums which exist there. And it is also heavily influenced by the Black Brazilian population who originated the genre. So funky has been around since maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, with records like Boladona by Tati Quebra-Barraco being very popular at that time. But as we get into the 2000s and early 2010s, funky is starting to be known around the globe. Anita in tandem saw her career rise in Brazil and also outside of it. So here is what Anita looked like in around 2012. This is a screen grab from her music video, Mega y Abusada. So in this time period, we see Anita appears as a lighter-skinned woman who is styled kind of like a Katy Perry or a Kate Nash. By the mid-2010s, Anita started to explore doing records in languages other than Portuguese. This included the Spanish language Downtown featuring J Balvin, and the English language Switch featuring Iggy Azalea. And it's around this time that there was also controversy as to whether or not Anita had whitened her appearance. This whitening ranging from just a stylistic change of appearance or if she had actually bleached her skin. Now for this section of the video, I am going to be quoting from a couple articles posted to blackbraziltoday.com. The first article is by blogger Jarid Arayes and it is called Anita, Whitening and Elitization. The second article is by Ana Beatriz Rosa and it is entitled In Brazil, No One is White, Anita's Response to Criticism of Her New Look. There is also commentary on both articles by Black Brazil Today editor Marquis Travaille, and I will indicate when Travaille is speaking. So for context, Anita is of mixed race heritage. Wikipedia ambiguously only describes her as Afro-Brazilian, but in her own words, which we'll get to, she describes herself as being biracial. Here is a quote from the article by Arayes. One must understand that the identity that Anita or other artists have about their color is something subjective, built over the years under the influence of society. It's no use to relativize racial recognition and reduce it to a matter of affirmation, because to understand oneself as black is not a decisive factor for someone to be treated as black. For this to happen, it's necessary that society also manages to see the blackness in that person. She continues. Anita is an example of a racially mixed woman who was embranquecida, whitened, and, quote, enriched so that her artistic work was valued. The appearance of Anita is becoming increasingly different since her fame, with lightening treatments on an image increasingly elitist. Knowing this, it's worth reflection. Is Anita accepted for being recognized as a white woman, or has she been whitened in search of acceptance? If another funkera passed through a process of elitization and class embranquecimiento, whitening, would they be embraced by television programs in more diverse times? So to clarify, I do want to go into the meaning of the word elitization as used by Arraes. I don't want to give an overly simplistic view of a society as dynamic as Brazil's, but I'm going to try to clarify this as much as I can from my vantage point. Brazil is a multiracial country. While it was initially colonized by the Portuguese, it is home to many ethnic groups including Europeans, Africans, Asians, indigenous people, and others. Generally speaking, in Brazil, lighter skin is associated with wealth and status. So elitization is seen not just as earning more money, but also as being associated with white society. Therefore, to whiten is not just to potentially lighten your skin, but also to adopt a sort of mentality or a sort of point of view that is linked to white Brazilian society. Keeping in mind that the racial categories of Brazil are quite delineated. Thus, it is possible for someone of African descent in Brazil to be either brown or black or mixed race or various other things. To go into this in more detail, I'll reference a note in the second article made by editor Marquis Torvai. Torvai writes, "Like many women that one could see walking the streets of any Brazilian city, Anita may be seen differently in terms of race according to the person who sees her. For some, she is simply typical of the Brazilian people, a mestiza, woman of mixed race, of various racial mixtures. For some people, she may even be considered a species of a branca brasileira Brazilian white, meaning someone who probably wouldn't be considered white in the United States or Europe, but passes as such in Brazil. Still, others see her as simply a negra de pele clara, light-skinned black woman, using the privileges of her closer proximity to European features to her advantage." Again, there's more to this story, but the general thought is that there's an ambiguity to how Anita presents herself. When confronted with an accusation of bleaching her skin, Anita had this to say in Glamour magazine. "Of course, I did not do any of this, people. My father and his family are black people from Belo Horizonte, and my mother is white from Paraíba. It's that I have no time to go to the beach. When I go, you'll see, I come back a little black girl." So this is where the notion of the video gets a little complicated by virtue of someone like Anita being not exactly white, but having a more quantum identity. In the larger global market, she is racialized as a sort of ambiguously ethnic Brazilian, but this does not get her that much weight in Brazil, where the racial categories are more specifically delineated. Because as we've seen, she does not consider herself to be a parda, brown, or a preta, black. So while her appearance appears to have been whitened in the Brazilian context, to the global stage she still has more of a conventional Latina aesthetic. And I would say that that has contributed to her ability to be able to cross over into the Spanish language and even English language music market. By this paradigm, she can be seen in conversation even with Black and Hispanic Americans. What Anita represents is this familiar trope of assimilating for career gains. We can put her in conversation with someone like Rita Hayworth, born Margarita Cancino, who famously de-ethnicized her appearance in order to join Hollywood. Or someone potentially like Lindsay Price, who I believe is partially of Asian descent but had surgery to make her face look more Eurocentric in order to gain more roles in the acting world. And to be honest, it's a little bit difficult to lay the blame on any given individual when the wider world is so anti-black, orientalist, and Eurocentric. Whether she's in Brazil or outside of it, she's still going to experience these forces. And Anita herself has even commented on her own penchant for modifying her appearance.
"My relationship with my body and image always being the way it is because I love to change. I love getting my face done and wake up different and be like, I like that. And then it's not that I'm not liking what I have right now. I just enjoy the process. I just have fun with it."
Now we do know and acknowledge that there are other black funky MCs and singers in Brazil, someone like Ludmilla, MC Carol, Bonde das Maravilhas, but that doesn't change that they have not achieved any sort of global success to the same level that Anita has. So while Anita is not racially white, she can still present as a white face, as an avatar for something bigger than herself. And I do think it's interesting to look at her in the light of someone that is actually fostering collaborations across cultures and across divides. So where do we go from here? We return to this perennial question best expressed by Outcast MC Andre 3000. Across cultures, darker people suffer more. Why? Why? As it pertains to music, why do we associate a dark-skinned or Afrocentric phenotype with something less valuable, less marketable, and less universal? On the flip side, why do we associate a light-skin phenotype with something that is more desirable and easy to digest? These are heavy questions that don't really have a neat and tidy answer. Because it's one thing to call for support of marginalized people in any given music genre, but it's another thing entirely to open up the market and allow these people to succeed. Yes, representation is good. People will say that representation is the answer to this problem, but labels often leverage representation against marginalized people in music in order to blame them for their lack of success. I think one can start by diversifying the music that they listen to and actually going to people's shows, buying their merch, and engaging with the larger creative economy. Honestly though, I think we do have to acknowledge that the European dictations of anti-blackness, Orientalism, and the idea of the other have just cooked us for a very long time to come. To reiterate, we are still actively attempting to decolonize our society, and just attempting at that. So in the aftermath of colonialism, it's going to take more than just vibes to tip the scales away from the status quo. Alright folks, that's the video. Thanks again for making it this far. Please keep the comments cute and free of Stan Wars. And let me know in the comments where you're from and who you consider to be a global icon by your own metrics. What's your favorite Dua Lipa song? What's your favorite Rosalia song? What's your favorite Anita song? I want to know all of these things also in the comments below. And if there's more content related to musicians of color that you'd like to see from this channel, also let me know that. This is Hassan with the Diaspora Gothic channel. Remember to stay connected, stay rooted, and stay dramatic. Bye. Got